Welcome back, everybody, if you were here for our first MAO panel discussion, because now we are on to our second. And if this is your first time, welcome as well. This is so exciting to be able to really connect with everybody as much as we are through this platform while we are all safely staying home. So this is just as exciting as it was the first time with 3 new artists and a new topic. And it's just wonderful that we have everybody here. So today, the topic we are going to cover is design and composition. And our panel consists of 3 very talented, award-winning Mosaic artists and instructors here at Mosaic Arts Online: Rachel Sager, Yulia Hanansen, and Gila Rayberg. Each one of these artist instructors approaches their mosaic art practice from very different perspectives. And if you follow any of them, or all of them, you know that already. But design and composition is incredibly important art elements that must be paid attention throughout the whole creating process for each of them. And anyone else that does create any kind of art, it really crosses all mediums, how important these 2 art elements are. And I'm thrilled that I was able to bring the 3 of them together here today so that we can discuss this. And based on the sum of the questions, we got so many questions and they were really incredible. And we could spend 2 days just talking about all of the content that we were able to kind of mash together. But what we're really going to do is we drilled down to 6 questions that we're going to go over today. And I will ask 2 questions per artist, and the other 2 artists will be able to contribute to that question from their approach of mosaic art. And so I'd love to welcome Rachel Sager, Yulia Hanansen, and Gila Rayberg for the second MAO panel discussion live here at our YouTube channel. So I would like to start with Yulia from Baltimore, Maryland. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your approach to design and composition.
Hi, everyone. I am a second-generation mosaic artist. I've been making mosaics professionally since 2001. I opened a studio first in Ann Arbor, Michigan, titled Mosaic Sphere Studio. Right now, I live in Baltimore, Maryland, and I also practice mosaic art here. I make mosaics for walls, for public and private spaces. And also a big part of me being a mosaic artist is teaching mosaic arts. So I do online classes with Mosaic Arts Online, and I also do in-person classes. In terms of what composition and design mean to me, I grew up on it. And trying to compose my artwork. So there is to me, there is a distinction between what composition is and what the design is. So the composition to me means a formula at which I arrive on where and how my elements are going to be distributed on the picture plane. So for example, if it's going to be this, where it goes under that diagonal, or if it's going to be this is just a sketch and the design is going to go up and down the composition. But then design is all about how it's going to be done. So it's a creative decision that I'm going to make, and that involves the materials, the colors, the texture, and all other stylistic elements.
Thank you very much. So Gila Rayberg from Pensacola, Florida. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your approach to design and composition.
Okay, hello everyone. I live in Florida and I practice mosaic here now, but my formal training is in music, actually. That's what I studied, and I come from that perspective. So I kind of played all kind of different music, and one of my favorite musics is jazz. And I find that since I started doing mosaic probably about 15 years ago, I kind of feel like that improvisational voice that I always wish I had in jazz has come through for me in Mosaic. And I really kind of approach my work in a very improvisational, experimental kind of way. In the last several years, I've been concentrating on portraiture. And so most of my compositions, you know, there's like one focal point, but there's so many other elements of the design that you have to keep in focus as you work, even though I don't really kind of focus on that from the beginning. As I'm looking for references that I'll use for my portraits, even when I'm looking for the references, I start to look at elements within a face that I can use to make a strong composition. So it's just looking at those things like contrast and the colors and the different perspectives. Those things all play into it, just as right from the start as I'm searching for my reference. And then as I start to compose my piece and put it together, I'm very intuitive about it, and I don't necessarily plan everything. As a matter of fact, most of the time I start a piece without really knowing what materials are going to follow. I kind of figure out a place I want to start, and from there I let it grow. But at the same time, I'm always aware of design elements like balance and contrast and colors. And so that's always kind of in my mind as I'm creating and being spontaneous about my work. Yeah.
I love that. Thank you. And Rachel Sager from Witsit, Pennsylvania. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm thrilled to be here. As many of you might possibly know, I come from the Rust Belt, Appalachia, a part of the world that, I don't know, a lot of people just sometimes don't quite get. And for lack of a better way to explain it, but the mountains, the hollows, the topography, and especially the geology of my little place has stamped, I don't know, you could even say a very red mark on me, on my soul as an artist. And it's taken me a long time to come to terms with that the place itself insisted on having the voice in my art. So everything I make is revolving around this place that I come from. And once I embraced that, I was gifted with this, I guess you, like Gila, what you said, that word intuition, it's very important to how I make my art and my compositions. That's where those terms, intuitive andamento and intuitive composition, come from. You know, I'm self-taught. A lot of my, most of my art education involved a lot of struggle and second guessing, angst. I felt like I had to scratch and claw my way into becoming an artist. It took me, you know, I've been doing it for more than half my life at this point. And my confidence took a long time to ripen. I'm still ripening. But you know, it's funny, as I talk about this, where I came from, I am reminded of a memory of someone, a wonderful man named Bill Buckingham, who was one of the philosopher kings of our Mosaic world. And he's sadly gone. He's moved on to another place. But back in the beginning, when I was still learning about what kind of an artist I was going to become, he wrote an essay about the Apollonian and Dionysian dichotomy. So Apollo is the god of order and light and knowledge, and Dionysus is the god of wine and emotion and chaos. And he used two artists to bring this essay to life. And Sonia King was the order and the Apollo, and I was the chaos. And you know, it was a beautiful thing to be a part of that, especially early in my career, to have that, you know, that focus, that little article that he wrote. But I don't think I really understood it until maybe very recently, because I keep going back to that, and I realized that Bill had given me this gift, and he had set this table for me. He had set a table with a beautiful china plate and silverware and a glass of wine, and he had put this order and chaos right there in front of me. And I've been partaking of it ever since. And, when I build a composition, those two ideas are always with me, order and chaos. And I'm always walking the line between the two and trying to balance. You use the word balance, Gila, too. Balance is very important in composition. And I believe very strongly that you need both. You need both the order and the chaos to create art that touches people emotionally. You have to have the order, which is the infrastructure and the bones and the rules to make the picture come together and have it make sense. But then you need the chaos. Sometimes I like to call it the mess, the surprise, or sometimes it's that element that someone can't even put a word to exactly. And maybe that's the whole point, that you're not supposed to be able to put it into words, but that's what touches you. And so that's, when I use that phrase, intuitive composition, it's about pulling things out of myself that might be buried or hidden or lost a long time ago. And when we begin building the bones of a composition, when I do, you can bet that I've been dreaming about it or having nightmares about it or writing about it about whatever this picture is going to end up being. And not every piece of art is really, really important for an artist. But for me, the ones that are important are a way for me to work out problems in my life, whether that's my place in the world or grappling with an insecurity or just turning a powerful conversation into a picture, which I think, leads back into what we're doing right now. I mean, we can't be at SAMA this, next month. And that's a very, very important event for all of us. So these conversations that we're having, that's what makes, that's what fires us up, isn't it?
Yes, it does. And thank you. That was beautiful. In case you are new to Mosaic Arts Online, some of you did literally just join us and found us maybe on social media. My name is Tammy McCullough, and I'm actually the owner of Mosaic Arts Online. And also, I am the president of the Society of American Mosaic Artists that Rachel did just mention. And it is somewhat heartbreaking that we will not physically all be together next month in Tucson. But hopefully in January, we will all be back together. And each of the artists that are here today have such a high caliber of work that they've presented, and they've all been in the Mosaic Arts International Show, which is a huge juried exhibition that goes on every year in a different part of the country within the American Mosaic Summit. So I just want to thank you guys for coming and spending your time and sharing your information, just so everyone else can feel engaged while we are not able to physically be together. This means a lot to me. And I'm just thrilled that we are getting such great feedback from everybody. So I think we're going to dive into the first question. And the first question, excuse me, I changed my page, goes to Yulia. And we sort of rehearsed this, so she knew. The question is, I take pictures of flowers, I use them in watercolors, then mosaic the painting using Yulia's method. And if you haven't studied under Yulia, whether online or in person, I highly recommend it. Great courses. My question is, how do you crop or choose part of the picture to get the best design?
Okay, so there are several ways of dealing with this, and it's part of the composition. How do you actually take a photograph and then crop it down to something that works? So first and foremost, and I have a lot of visuals for you today. So first and foremost, I like using the angles, just right angles. You can cut them out of paper. And then when you have a photograph or face or something, you can play around with it. So for example, I have this image that can fit in here, or I could crop it down to something that works for me compositionally. So and you look at this and see how well it's balanced. So this is one of the ways to do it, playing with the right angles. You should also look into the rule of thirds. I do use this in my compositions a lot. So for example, composition like this, and the rule of third states that if you divide your work into 3 parts like this, with 2 lines horizontally and 2 lines going vertically. The most pleasing to the eye composition would have the elements going through these lines, and also the elements that sit at the intersection of the lines. So if you look at this flower, then the part of it just lies right where this line is. And then the most brightest part is where the intersection of the line is. So, this is one of the good principles to use, especially if you're just starting with composition. So for example, in this mosaic that I created, there's also a rule of thirds. If you take this line, it's actually a subdivision of, like, it's a 1/3 of this plus this. If you draw the line through here, so there's another line. And it's more pleasing to the eye this way than if you draw it in some other way.
No, that's great.
Yeah. So another principle that I use in my composition is, especially with flowers, is the symmetry, principle of symmetry. So for example, hold on, it's like this. So for example, if I have an orchid image like this, and it doesn't quite sit well for me on the page, I want more balance, because it seems like it's tipping to the left for me right now. But if I add to it, it becomes symmetrical. So I have this composition that runs down the center, and it's okay to do that as long as it's interesting, because it's really easy to write a very boring composition that is centered and it's not interesting enough. But this one has a lot of textures. This one has an approximate symmetry, which means that if you have the symmetry line, that not everything is exactly symmetrical. It's not a mirror, it's approximate, and that contributes to how interesting your composition is. And another thing that I use in my composition making and in design as a principle is the balance of the objects. This one is by Giorgio O'Keeffe. It's a painting, and you can see that the large element is balanced with the smaller element right here. So it's not symmetrical, and you can do that. You can try dealing with this. But as long as nothing is tipping over too much. So you have to look for that visual balance that works for you. And also if you are working for a client, or if you're doing it for somebody else, that it also works for that person. So that's very important. I guess.
Well,
yeah.
Yeah, go on.
Well, okay. Anybody else wants to add to this?
Yeah, Rachel, can you add a little bit to that part of the conversation?
Yes. The viewfinder, the rule of thirds I love also, and I use it all the time. But the viewfinder, one of the things that I find that I use is windows and doors. Just not to necessarily make a piece of art, but to look at a composition through a window. You know, hopefully you have something pretty to look at through your window. That's what we're all doing right now, is looking through our windows, right? But you know, I'm looking right now at this window, and I can see the ruins. It's not dark yet, so I can see a piece of the ruins. And what I do is I adjust myself a little bit and move this way or this way, and I can chop off a section of that composition that I'm looking at right there. I can, you know, lower myself or raise myself up, but this way, going back and forth is a really good way to kind of use the viewfinder to chop things or add a section. And I do it everywhere, and I didn't even realize that I did it until I started, you know, teaching this composition, this intuitive composition course. And I realized that I'm always looking, whether it's a line of sight far away or a doorway or a window. But we all have that. It's the easiest thing in the world to just look out your window right now and do this and think about how you're, you know, you take a street sign out. You can just take it out by moving a little bit and just having, you know, the beautiful grass or sunset or whatever in it. So that's my viewfinder.
I
trick.
love it. And as you can see, I didn't plan the background behind me, but there's like the perfect grid behind me. So moving on, because we do see it everywhere. Gila, can you add to the discussion here?
Well, I love that thing about the viewfinder, but I have the same thing mostly, like I said, because I do a lot of portraiture. You'll notice that I very rarely put things straight in the center, and that rule of thirds is really important. I do look at that all the time. And also in my work, you'll notice I really like to go for the unusual perspective and, you know, angle and distortion a little bit too in my work. And so I'm always playing with that and balancing out how things can be distorted in a way and still get a nice composition. Basically thinking about those same elements though, of the thirds and just balance in general.
No, you are the queen of doing that with your hands, bringing the hands forward in your work. So it's so great how you each come to this with such talent and such different perspectives. All right, so moving on to our next question, Gila, do you think using too many different types of materials can cause a mosaic to have too much variety and not enough unity?
Yes.
I think we can all agree, yes.
So that's the simple answer. Of course, yes. But the key here is all the same things we're talking about is to pay attention to things. Okay, so you can use a lot of materials in just kind of a random way, and they may not be cohesive or anything. But what you have to keep in mind is what you're trying to achieve. Okay, what kind of mood do you want? What kind of contrast do you want? Because you can use a lot of different materials to good effect if you understand what their properties are and how you can get good value out of it. So I have this to show you as an example. I mean, this is pretty straightforward. It may be more complicated in something abstract or more complicated composition, but this is just a simple composition, a self-portrait I did. And I've used stained glass, smalty, Picassiette, dishes, and unglazed porcelain. And they all have really different properties that are what make the composition interesting. So the stained glass is shiny and it's flat. It's the lowest thing. So it's receding back. And I have the smalty, which is the glasses and the hair, which is coming forward. So all these things is to help me, the different materials can help me build my textural interest and the way I set them, you know, how we set the materials. So when you do change materials, you know, think about the progression from one thing to another. Are you having matte against shiny? And are you wanting that effect? Or is that effect, you know, not right? Am I picking a shiny thing and then really a shiny thing isn't appropriate in that one spot? So that is that. And
Rachel, go ahead, Gila. Go ahead.
I was just going to say also, I mean, one of the things that Mosaic has that lends itself extremely well to the idea and element of design, which is really important, which is repetition of shape. And because we're cutting things, we're making shapes. Everything we cut, we're making a shape. And so you have to be really mindful when you're cutting your materials of cutting them in a similar way or not, but with purpose. You know, everything you do, every cut you make should be with intention. You should understand where you're going with that rather than just kind of randomly putting pieces down. Because even if like if I'm doing a piece in a portrait, and often in my work, there's so many different elements going on with different designs and patterns and plates, and somehow I seem to make them work because I'm really concentrating on the value of things, because materials can have a lot of different pattern in them, but they usually have a predominant value. And so that, you know, even though you may first off see something and it seems dark, but it may actually be light next to something else. So those are things you always have to be keeping in mind as you work out your composition.
No, that's a great answer. Really good. Thank you.
Very
Rachel,
well said,
can you contribute to that question?
Well, I obviously agree also, Gila, and I love all of your examples that you use. For me, it really, you know, I always use the example that language trumps material. Language always, you know, the andamento is the end all be all for me anyway. So if you know, I have an example that I use sometimes in a slideshow. It's a piece, I don't know how long ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, who knows? I've lost track of time, but I call it Rachel's Folly. I wish I had it here. It's in my mother's living room, so I don't have it with me. But it was me throwing every beautiful thing I had at one substrate with no plan whatsoever. And I look back on it fondly because it's one of those pieces that got me from one point to another point, right? Because I looked back on it in horror a little while after I made it and realized that I wasn't respecting the material. You're talking about the properties of the material. I wasn't, thank you. I wasn't, sorry, I just got interrupted there for a second. I used, in this piece, I had 24 karat gold, I had smalty, I had, what do you call that beautiful petrified wood, copper, all these amazing, wonderful, wonderful materials. And I just threw them all at this piece with no plan. And it was a disaster, you know, not anymore because I can talk about it as a problem solving disaster, but it does happen a lot in Mosaic. It does, because we get, you know, we love the material. We love collecting the material. That's part of the fun of being a mosaic artist, right? But if you don't temper that with some kind of order, you know, talk about the chaos versus order, some kind of order, then you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, if we all opened up our closets and said, go for it, we'd be in big trouble. Yeah.
And also, your eye needs a rest.
Yes.
You can't have energy everywhere. You need to relax and have silent spaces. That's why space and negative space is important.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yep.
And Yulia?
For me, if I use a lot of different materials, they have to justify themselves this way. So it's important to have a dominant material. So, for example, if I'm using smalty, I'm going to go with majority of that material, and then I could add stone, I could add beads if I want to millefiori or something. But what they do is they're just supporting my main material. So I don't think it's a disaster to have a lot of different materials thrown into one piece. It's just how do you use them? So basically, by putting this many pieces together, this many materials, you're creating an orchestra, but that orchestra has to be well calibrated. So the voices are heard appropriately, and your tessera looks like it's related to each other. So if you put several pieces into one, let's say like if you have stone and smalty, the pieces would shine. Smalty is shiny, and then the stone has to, it's slightly muted. So how do you justify using that? So if you have the composition that calls for that, like let's say you have a line that runs through and it's nice and shiny, and you do it with smalty, and then you do background muted down with stone. Not necessarily muted down as a, as a diminishing the material, but rather that it's not, coming forward as much as that smalty because it's more, the line is important. So if you have that, then it works together. So I mix and match materials all the time with my work. I know I do two types of works. I do a lot of floral designs for different purposes, but I also do a lot of abstract work, and that's where I throw in a lot of different materials. So sometimes I go by color, and sometimes I go by the texture and what works.
Well, and Yulia, I own one of your pieces that I believe has salt on it. So you will use any piece of, and it's still there. It has not completely disintegrated.
Yeah,
but Yulia,
that will melt down later on.
Yeah, no, you are definitely, you talk about order and chaos, Yulia, you have that, you all have it nailed down in one way, but your layered technique that you do and able to create some order within all of that movement is really amazing. So, all right, so moving on to Rachel, many of us have a small and limiting glass palette in terms of color, and I'm going to guess this could be stained glass or smalty, this becomes very challenging if one wants to plan any composition which requires more detailing. So once you change your design and composition based on the colors, so can you change the design and composition based on the colors that have, or should one attempt a detailed composition only when one has bought many, many colors to work with?
I love this question.
Well, jump on.
It's one of my favorite questions. And I love it because of the words limiting, challenging, and harmonious. Those are three really good words, and I'm going to talk about each of them. So let's look at the word limiting first. Well, obviously my answer is no, you should not wait, right? You definitely shouldn't wait until you have all the colors. I mean, I do have, see, all the colors are over there. I do have all the colors, but you don't have to have all the colors at all. So the word limiting, let's say you have a very small range of colors. Let's just, as an example, let's say you have 5 shades of blue smalty, and that's it. That's all you have. You have to do something amazingly harmonious and challenging with it. So I see that as an opportunity. You know, what we were just talking about for the last question was, you know, being overly dependent on the material. You don't want to be overly dependent on color because there's so much more going on with mosaic than just color. That's one of the traps that we fall into is, you know, as mosaic artists is, and I'm not saying that color is bad in any way, of course, you know, I love it too, but it can cause problems if you don't, let's see, how do I want to say that? If you just depend on the color and nothing else. So and I don't have this picture drawn out, but just let's put a picture in our head of let's do a bird on a wire against the sky. Just a simple, very, very simple bird, you know, against a sky. And you have these 5 colors of blue. So how do you make that bird stand out and become the focal point or the emphasis of your composition? And this is more of a design, you know, adventure we're talking about right now than composition necessarily, because I'm not going to talk about where the bird is. I'm just talking about how do you make that bird pop out with those 5 colors of blue. So one way is to talk about this, because everything's based on the pieces of things, right? That's what we do. We work with pieces of things. So let's talk about the shape of those pieces. Let's make all of the shapes for the little bird little slivers, okay? And then for the background, we're going to have all squares. So that's one element that we have that makes that bird different than the sky. Let's see, I actually have I have a little thing. This is what I usually use for my andamento class, but it can also be used. See, we have shape, we have squares, rectangles, slivers, circles, all different kinds, so many different shapes you can make. And so let's go to the next one, size. Let's make all of the birds tessera, tiny, 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 really as small as you can get, almost micro mosaic, small. And then the sky, use much bigger tessera, you know, big tessera. So there's squares and they're bigger for the sky. And then let's see, one more. Actually, there's 2 more. Let's use space. All of the pieces in that bird are really, really close together too. Tight. No, the interstices are you almost don't even see them. And then when you go out again to the sky, you let everything breathe and you give some space between all of those bigger tessera. And then one more. Direction, which is another way of talking about the andamento or the line. All of the lines that make up your little bird are just very gradually horizontal, right? And then you can make the lines of your andamento in your sky go up and down vertically. So you could just do one of those things and you would still see that little bird, but if you keep adding those different elements, those 5 shades of blue, your little bird is going to be very dramatic and harmonious at the same time. So that's one thing that I want to say. Let's see. I just love this question. When I'm cutting my tessera, like we go back to size, I usually give myself at least 5 different sizes that I try to be cutting, because when you're cutting mosaic, you know, you do a lot of the time is spent cutting. I'll do very small, medium, large, extra large. And then either those get all mixed up together or they get put in different places to draw the eye. So that's problem solving in a very mosaic specific way. And then I'm going to show you a piece, an actual mosaic. I hope you can see this. So I'm gonna put it up pretty close. And I don't know if you can see that circle amidst the ocean.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah,
it's pretty subtle. But look at all that mix of materials. The circle is built out of exactly the same mix of materials. There's nothing different about the size or the mix of different glass and stone. The only thing that's different is the direction of the andamento to create the circle. You see how powerful, even though you don't necessarily notice it from far away, you notice it from close up. So that's just one element that changes all the same material. That's what I have to say about that.
Thank you. And Gila, can you talk a little bit about that question from your point of view?
Well, Ash, that was so good. I would just say that simplifying in general is a really great thing in mosaic, because mosaic becomes complicated just by the fact that it is lots of little pieces. So if you can find ways to simplify your design, I think that's always helpful.
Yeah. No, that's good. There's a lot going on in mosaic.
Yeah,
so.
and I think everything Rachel said was superb.
Yeah. And Yulia?
I'm just rereading the question. Basically, whether the color palette can limit your design and what you're doing. And to me, having a lot of colors is important. It's super important, especially when I work on realistic images such as flowers, or if I do gradients in color. It's so important to have the right materials and the right colors that I actually collect glass for years sometimes. And then, I take it all out and I have it all out, and then I put together a palette that is appropriate for certain mosaic. So, but on the other hand, you can also work with the limited color palette. That should not preclude you from making a mosaic, but you have to make decisions with how color plays around with the contrast and with the shapes that you're working on. So if it works, like maybe if you have very limited color palette, maybe you can outline the shapes and have that decision, have the outline distinguish one shape from another. But overall, for me, it is important to have a lot of different colors. I have very extensive color palette in glass, and when I need it, I use it.
And in stained glass, if you are someone working in stained glass, it does lend itself a lot of times to having a little bit of a gradient and variation within one piece. So sometimes that can be easier to work with than Smalty, where you have to buy one of every color as it gradates.
Of course, yeah. So the Smalty is a little harder, but you can do with the Smalty, and I'm sure Rachel and Gila will attest to that. That with Smalty you can go with the optical mix, so you can have a few colors, like one color and another color, and then you can blend the colors in between. So there is a way of getting a third color in between. You mix them like that.
Yeah, and we discussed that also. That kind of leads into the last panel we had, which was color, about how to do that. But no, those are great answers. Working with different materials, if you are going to do stained glass, Smalty, or even if you're in tile and stuff like that. So I just want to make sure everyone is still following along and enjoying themselves. And also, as you see in the live chat on your screen, you can leave questions for us that we will be answering in a follow-up next week. We will be filming a follow-up of more questions that were not able to be answered today. So don't hesitate to say hello in our chat. And also, if you do have any questions for anyone specifically of the three of our artists here, or just in general, please feel free to leave those in the chat. So we're going to start with our second set of questions. And so we're going back to Yulia. And this one's a few sentences long, so bear with me. Composition is multi-layered because it is involved from start to finish. So true. The phase I would like you to address is the starting point of layering material. I often find myself contemplating where to begin. Sometimes it is with the primary element, other times the areas that give me the most enjoyment in the piece, and still other times it could be the outside framing of the image. I am wondering if in your traditional art training, you are taught where to start. Additionally, if your primary art in school was not mosaic, do you find the construction of a mosaic piece in this sense? Do you have a different approach?
Yeah, so it's a very big question to answer. Of course, mosaic should be approached like any other art piece. So in this case, when I construct the layered glass mosaic, I approach them like a relief piece or as a sculptural piece. Let me see if I can share the screen right now just to show the examples. Oops.
Nope.
There you are.
Oh, okay. Gosh, can you see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. So for example, I start with this, right? So this is the finished work, but I start my work with this base layer. So in layered glass mosaics, what I want to construct the frame underneath, like a backbone for my composition. And I have the main colors laid out and the main shapes laid out. And only then I proceed to creating layers on top. So sometimes it's kind of like the layer is like a candy that you have on top that you get like dessert the last because you really want to do the really, really top highlight. You want to do this bright color and everything, but you have to hold up with that. And you need to stick. I'm sorry, something is happening to my screen. Just a second. So you need to hold off and just kind of follow through with that, constructing the backbone first, and then going with the proceeding with the rest of it. I have a couple more images to show. I'm not sure if they are. Oh, here we go. So here's another one that I have. This is the preparation, the base layer for the landfall mosaic. And you can see that it's just basically the composition right now. It's a two-piece, so one green part, one green shape, and another one is a blue shape, and it's a diagonal composition that runs through. That's what I constructed first. So I defined the areas that I'm going to mosaic first in glass, and then I went ahead and constructed on top the main lines that are going to run through. And those lines are not going to be visible at the end. So at the end, what I got is that. So this is my piece. It's called Landfall. It's weird. Ironically, I created it like a week before Hurricane Sandy has hit our area and in New York, everywhere. So, that's the result, the layered piece. So you almost can't even see the back structure. You can't see the backbone of it. You can't see the green or blue, but it's there. And if you look close enough, it comes through. And that's what all the layered mosaics are about. Let me see.
There we go.
Yeah. Okay. So does that answer the question, or is there?
No, I think that was great. That definitely talks about it and how you approach it. And Rachel, what could you contribute to that same question?
Well, I'm gonna just take that question and shorten it to where do you begin? Where do you begin? That's what I'm going to take from that. And where I begin is the most important thing. What's the most important thing that I want to say in this piece? And that's usually the first thing that I start, whether it's a symbol, I use a lot of symbolism in my art, archetypal images, things like that. Or if it's a map, you know, I do a lot of map work. Where's the equator going to be, or where's the main border of something else going to be that, you know, is the nucleus of the piece. And is this a good time to show that book, Tammy?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a book that I discovered recently that I absolutely love. Molly Bang. Picture this.
And we'll put it in the comments so people can see it afterwards.
It's very
as
simple. It's almost like a children's book. Just very simple shapes, and she gets really helps to get to the heart of the matter of how to touch people emotionally with your art in a very, very simple way. So I highly recommend that book. She actually has a few in the series, and you can literally read it in one night and have your mind blown about just things that you didn't realize how important you know, the difference between a triangle and a circle, and you know, the size of something compared to something else. And anyway, it's just yeah, touching. I don't want to say manipulating, but you know, in a way, artists do manipulate. We do manipulate the viewer when we create a composition, because we're in control about where they look first and then where they go next, and if their eye goes around the whole composition or if it stays in one area. So yeah, the most important thing, that's what I think of first. So
the beginning.
the beginning.
And Gila, what would you have to say?
Since I'll just talk mostly about portraiture, because in portraiture, most of the time I start with the eyes, because like they're very important and they already bring your subject to life once you have the eyes. And another reason for that too is they're the receded the most. And my work is very dimensional and textural. And so I'm thinking about, I need to build up, just like Yulia is doing. I have to start with what's the lowest level. And then I have to start, you know, the nose is going to come out from there. The glasses are going to be coming up above the eye. So I have to think about the dimensionality of my work when I'm starting to, and how am I going to build it kind of sculpturally in a way. And of course, I talk a lot about that in my portraiture class. And also sometimes, because I'm using Picassiette and dishes and interesting materials, sometimes and often, but I still a lot of times start with the eyes, but sometimes I'll have a piece of material, pottery, a cup or whatever, and that I know, okay, this is going to be a nose, or this is going to be the cheek or whatever. And so I have a focal point of some sort that's the shape of the pottery, or a design that's there that helps guide me of where to start. And then I kind of work outward from there. So,
yeah. No one's dishware is safe when Gila comes to town. That's a nose. No, that's my coffee mug.
nice dishes.
Oh, those are great answers. Thanks, you guys. There was a lot in that question, so I think you guys answered it phenomenally. So Gila, back to you for your second question. You have a design in mind and get halfway through the mosaic, stand back and decide you hate it. What do you do? Rework the design, muscle through to the end, or something else?
Okay, so this question really makes me laugh because it's so what happens.
We've all been there.
I think, yeah. For years, I mean, and we laugh because Mark, my other half, he says, of course you hate it now, but wait 5 minutes. Because there's always this phase where it's like nothing's looking like it's right, and ugh. And it's also, I feel that way about portraiture too, because I do portraits and all these years later, I'm still doing them. And it's because they're so challenging. I think they're really hard. And so it's why I'm so fascinated by them. And I keep working them out. It's always about problem solving. And so first of all, my first reaction is wait, don't rip anything out yet. Part of the problem is when you're working on a piece is you're not seeing the overall piece. You have to create balance. So maybe there's something that you've done that you have to continue on before you know if it's being balanced out somewhere. So this is where, when you start not feeling good about what you see, is where you can check those design elements. Is there some tone out of place? Is there a color wrong? Or is this piece too big or too small? Or did I cut the andamento the wrong direction? Knowing your keystoning and the flow is really important. So all of those things you need to check before you make any changes. Also, sometimes you're tired. You need to just step back, take a break, have a drink, whatever you do to relax, or have a good night's sleep and look at it with fresh eyes in the morning. Sometimes really that's all it takes, and you all of a sudden see what's happening. Another thing is using your camera as a tool. I always use my camera as a tool. Sometimes you see things in a photograph away from your piece that you're looking at your piece and you're so concentrated on it, you don't see it sometimes. So sometimes stepping away and actually taking a photo is a great tool. And then also one thing with my work, I'm always aware of saving back some of the material to use somewhere else. With painters and stuff, you can put a little dab of paint here or there to balance things out. So we have to do the same thing with our materials, So if you've used a lot of one color or one pattern in one area, it may just look really off until you use some of that same material somewhere else later down the line. Yep. It's also taken me quite a long time to be very comfortable getting out the chisel and ripping out work. I'm working on something for a couple of weeks, and all of a sudden, finally I get to that point. Okay, it's not balancing out. It's not working. I need to change it. It's so easy to do, and you have, it's, it took me years to be comfortable with it, but now I love it. It's like, so what I do is usually a lot of times it's just one or two pieces, something's off because I put something wrong in there. And so I'll try to find what I'm going to replace it with before I change it. So I kind of figure out what I'm going to do there instead. Then I'll go in and I'll dig out the pieces or the piece that's wrong. And even if a few extra pieces around what you did also come out, it's so much faster to put something back together that you've already done and then fix the spot that's wrong. And it's so much better. So it's so worth your while to take the time to make the changes when you notice them. Sometimes it's an obvious thing and sometimes it's not so obvious. So you have to really kind of think about what it is that's not working. And that's it. Sometimes, one other thing to remember is that not every piece you do is a masterpiece. There are things you do that just don't work out. And if it's really not working and you don't want to work on it anymore, take it as lesson learned. Something's not right here, move on. You can always learn from what you don't like.
Those are always great successes. They're not failures. Those are how we learn, is practice, 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 and experience like that you can refer back to when you do move on to another piece. So Rachel, can you contribute to that question?
Well, I just did this. I took a hammer and chisel yesterday, and I don't do it very often anymore, ever. I really don't, because I do plan things out pretty well at this point. But I did go in with the hammer and chisel, and I felt so much better after I did it. It wasn't too much. Like you said, it was just a few pieces. But what you said, Gila, about time, just wait until tomorrow. Sometimes, don't do it necessarily right away. Sometimes just thinking about it a little bit. And then the other thing, you said all kinds of good things I love, and this is something else that I've started to do a lot of, is creating a repetition of pattern throughout the piece. Save a little bit, keep something, the material saved from something, on this side of the piece, and repeat it. Just even if it's just a little tiny bit of repetition, it helps pull the whole piece together. Like let's say you're using a bright red somewhere in a really bold way, in a certain part, and it's too much. It feels like it's heavy, and it's too bold. Use a little bit of that red, just sprinkle it through the piece in tiny, tiny little ways, and that helps to soften out that starkness.
Yeah. Yeah.
So without tearing things apart.
And Yulia, I know you've torn them out.
I have to confess that I do put some pieces away. Sometimes I have a spontaneous desire to come and create something. So I run to the studio. I already have my watercolor composition ready. And then I start working on the mosaic. And I'm just like, wait a minute, this does not work. This is not what I wanted to do with it. Or maybe I'm just tired. So sometimes I just put pieces away, and it's a good idea to come back next day and look at it in a different light, different time of the day, and see. And sometimes I have like one piece that I finished and I've exhibited many times and I sold it. I've had that piece sitting in the storage for 3 years before I went back and I looked at it again and I said, oh my goodness, I know exactly what I have to do with it. So sometimes our creativity comes from spontaneity, and sometimes the creativity needs that support with the decision making that is solid, that is based on our design that we're working in, how are we using the colors, and also the idea. How do you present your concept that it works not just for you, not something that you saw in your little sketchy picture, but it works on the final product, which is Mosaic. So yeah, sometimes it's a good idea to put it away. And sometimes it's a good idea to just chisel it out, which I try not to do because it's a really painful process.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but what I'll tell you with the layered glass mosaics, sometimes it's an easier process because you can either take off the layers if it's just freshly glued and the glue hasn't dried yet, you can remove the layers. But also with the layering, there is no limit how many tessera can be piled up on top, or a limit, right? So there's a visual limit, or it works.
You just go layer and layer and layer. Forget the tearing out.
You can fix the composition that way. It's like painting, an oil painting, where you can put brush strokes one on top of the other. So you can fix that or add to your composition, so enhance it so it works.
Yeah. Well, and if you are a member of the Society of American Mosaic Artists and you do get the Groutline magazine, I will contribute my little bit of an article I wrote because I had to tear out 3 sections of a commission I actually was doing based on the client changing design. So I highly recommend you read the article. It's not too long, but it's very enlightening to what can happen to an artist when you got to get the chisel out. And I actually had to get my husband to do it because I could not bring myself to tear my hard work out. So on that note, we have one last question, and this one goes to Rachel. And we're going to go over a little bit tonight, but this has been such a great conversation. So stick with us till the bonus at the end. Do you feel it is important to have a strong understanding of design basics and demonstrate those skills before you make art that breaks all the rules?
Another good question, right?
I know.
Yes.
We only have like 15 minutes, Rach.
All right, I'll be quick. Yes, I do, and no, I don't. And that's not me trying to have my cake and eat it too.
Yes, it is.
But we are artists, right? Isn't it our job to break the rules, to get messy, to create the chaos, to fail miserably and look back at our old work and be embarrassed by it? I think that's part of the game. And we're artists. We're meant to stir things up, right? Without that intoxicating, I cannot wait another minute. I just have to make this thing right now. Without that feeling of frenzy, that energy, new ground does not get broken. And when I say new ground, I don't just mean reinventing the wheel. I mean your very personal wheel. Without the pain of failure, we don't get the joy and that sweet feeling of success, right? I have colleagues on both sides of this coin. I have friends and colleagues who don't want anything to do with the rules. They hate the idea of even having it be put in front of them because they feel like it'll get in the way of their the essence of who they are. And then I have other people on the other side who it just would never even occur to them to think about what that means to break the rules. They don't need to. They can work very happily within the rules. And what's really cool about being part of an organization or part of a tribe or whatever you want to call us is that you get to watch one side, tiptoe to the other side, and then this side tiptoe into this side, and then sometimes somebody will just dive into the other side, right? and then they're completely transformed, and they're not the same artist anymore, and that's such an amazing thing to watch. But when I was teaching a lot, I would say that there's a big difference between breaking the rules with intention and for specific reasons, and breaking the rules because you don't even know that there are rules, right? There's a huge ocean of difference between those two things. But I hope that, let's hope that the rule breaker that you are, you find ways to keep that intoxication, that you can't wait another minute to get this on the substrate feeling. And you keep that going long enough, and eventually you start to see farther down the path. And you see that all of this old knowledge of the Romans and the Greeks, and even farther back than that, and you realize that there's something really important about those old ways and that old language. It's there. It's been around that long for a really good reason. Yeah. And then things get really interesting because as a modern artist, you get to mold those rules and into something completely fresh, whether you're breaking them or following them, but you're a contemporary mosaic artist. And the beauty of when I was talking about my scratching and fighting, when I first started to do this as a self-taught, it was before the internet really was so powerful. And now look at us. We can take on these beautiful online classes. We can learn from teachers all over the world. Everything is at our fingertips now. So it's just a really wonderful time to jump into the most powerful medium in the world. Yeah. So
I love that. No, that's great. And Gila, tell us a little bit of your perspective on that question.
Well, I started making mosaics before I knew any rules. So you certainly can. I came from having all of those kind of critical, learning the rules, being judged in my musical career, and being having all that stress of being critiqued and everything, which I'm sure everyone who went to art school also had, but I never had. So when I started doing mosaic, I kind of didn't want that. I wanted to just do art that I wanted to do. And I've kind of learned the rules as I've been learning how to make mosaic. And so that's I've kind of come to all of this in a backwards kind of way. But even when I started doing portraiture about 10, 12 years ago, I'm all self-taught, and it's all from a group I belong to online also. And I just started drawing and drawing and drawing and drawing every day, practicing. It's all about practice and getting better and seeing. The drawing helped me to develop, to understand about design and about shading and about texture and about all those different things. So anything you can do to help develop your artistic skills in any form is going to be helpful.
Yeah, and practice couldn't be more important in that, no matter how you do it. It's just the daily practice of getting out there and doing something, especially nowadays that we all do have a little more time on our hands to be in the studio, even if it's just an hour a day. It can make a huge difference, and you see breakthroughs. And yeah, Gila, you are a huge testament to coming in through the back door, which many of us did, but you have gone strides in your work, and it's unbelievable the stuff that you produce. So it's a really awesome to see your story. Yulia, for our last part of the panel.
The role playing. So I feel to me it's very important to know the basics and the rules before you start breaking them. By knowing the rules, I find it's easier to see into other artists' work and see how it's structured, what it's made out of, what the process was. So when I look at the artwork, to me, it's not just, there's an image. I read the artwork. I go into depth of it. And part of it is knowing the rules, like what goes into composition, what goes into design, what goes into color, textures, everything else. But on the other hand, it's okay to break the rules. there are formal rules that you probably should stick to. So, for example, techniques that you follow, it's like you mix pincette in certain ways, you use your smalty, you cut it in certain ways. So those are kind of good to stick to. But overall, in terms of composition or design, I think it's, you take those rules and you create your own formula. You create your own rules, you create your own formula for the art, and that's how you develop your style. That's how you develop your own voice. So I think by breaking the rules, you actually create something new. That's like an evolution in the art that happens when you break the rules. It doesn't work in other disciplines, but it works really well in art, I find.
And you three couldn't be more perfect examples of exactly that, because if you see a Yulia Hanansen piece, you know exactly it was Yulia, and she has created her own style and voice in layered and in her florals that she does. Rachel has her own style that you absolutely know when you see it, and has come such a long way in the different ways that she's creating now. And Gila, just the portraitures that you create and the other stuff that you use, Picassiette, nobody does it like you. So it really is amazing that you guys came full circle in this conversation, and that's where it landed, because it was so rich to just hear each of you really discuss this topic, which is super important to me. I think art elements is where it all starts. And for those of us that are self-taught, it took a little bit longer for us to get there, because we didn't sit in a classroom and necessarily learn, or have to do it one day and then the teacher ripped it up and we had to do it again the next day. So you have to kind of figure out your path and just stay on it and break rules and learn. And all of a sudden one day you look at something and you're like, I created that myself. And it's you, and it speaks from your heart, your soul, your intuition. So I can't thank you three enough for participating in this MAO panel on design and composition. And we have had a few questions that we will use in our follow-up, which we will present on our YouTube channel again next week. But because you stayed till the very end, you all get a limited time discount on the 3 courses that are here. They're going to go into the chat, but if you are looking to do Rachel's intuitive composition, it's 15% off. If you want to do Gila's Picassiette portraiture, it's 15% off, and Yulia's flower mosaic course is 15% off. You need those codes: Rachel-15, Gila-15, Yulia-15, and they're being put into the chat right now, so they'll be there for you to see them as well. So it's 15% off till Sunday. Tomorrow night at midnight, you have to get that extra discount. And yeah, right.
It's very rare, right? If you give discounts, it's usually.
Oh no, yeah, to do 15% is super rare. And we know everybody is staying home a lot more, so this is your opportunity to save a little extra money. If you don't own any or all of those courses, you can do all of them at that discount as well. But this is great to add to your collection of MAO courses, and lots of testimonials on those courses as well from different students that have taken it and have gone long strides in becoming better mosaic artists. If I had had Mosaic Arts Online when I first started, and I bet you all 3 of them could attest to it, we have gotten a lot farther, a lot faster. So, but I can't thank you guys enough. And if you guys have anything else you want to say to wrap it up, we're here.
Just thank you, Tammy, for organizing this.
Tammy, thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.